Daddy, Daddy! The word hit Jonathan Hale without warning. He stopped mid-step. For a brief moment, he told himself it wasn't meant for him. Hospitals were full of children calling out to fathers who were not him. He had never been anyone's father. He had never planned to be. Jonathan turned anyway. A small black girl stood a few feet away, looking straight at him. She was about 6 years old, her coat a little too big, her hair neatly braided. What unsettled him was not the word she had used, but the way she looked at him, as if she already knew the answer to a question he had never allowed himself to ask. He forced a light smile, polite and distant. "You've got the wrong person," he said calmly. "I'm not your dad." He stepped to the side, intent on continuing down the hall. The girl moved with him. She lifted her arms slightly, standing in front of him again, blocking his way with quiet determination. "My name is Annie," she said. "And you are?" Jonathan let out a small, controlled breath. "I think you should go find your mother," he replied. "She's probably worried." Annie shook her head. "She told me not to let you walk away." Jonathan frowned despite himself. "I don't have children," he said, more firmly now. "You're mistaken." Annie studied his face closely. Not in the way children usually looked at strangers with curiosity or fear, but with focus. Her eyes moved from his eyes to his mouth, then back again. "You look like me," she said. Jonathan almost laughed. "That doesn't mean anything," he replied. "Lots of people look alike." But even as he said it, something inside him hesitated. Annie tilted her head slightly, the same way he did when he was thinking. Jonathan felt his expression change before he could stop it. He looked at her again, really looked this time. The shape of her eyes, the line of her nose, the serious set of her mouth. The resemblance was impossible to ignore once it took hold. He straightened, instinctively putting distance between them. "That's enough," he said. "I can't help you." Annie didn't argue. Instead, she reached out and gently took hold of the sleeve of his coat. "Come with me," she said. "I'll take you to my mom." Jonathan's body went rigid. "No," he answered immediately. "Let go!" Annie loosened her grip but didn't step back. "She's right there," Annie said, pointing down the corridor. "She's fixing papers. She's been scared you wouldn't come back." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Jonathan replied. His voice was low now, controlled. "You shouldn't be talking to strangers." "You're not a stranger," Annie said. "You're my daddy." Jonathan felt something shift inside his chest, an unfamiliar pressure. Not pain, not fear, but something dangerously close to recognition. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but you're wrong." He stepped past her. "Annie." The voice came sharp and urgent. Jonathan stopped again. A woman hurried toward them, her face tight with panic. When she reached Annie, she placed both hands on her shoulders, checking her as if to make sure she was still there. "I told you not to wander off," the woman said. Then she looked up and froze. The air between them changed instantly. Jonathan recognized her before his mind allowed him to speak. Time collapsed. She looked older, thinner, more tired, but it was her, the woman he had once trusted, the woman he had buried along with a future he told himself he never wanted. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, as if she were afraid to blink. "You," Jonathan said. The word came out rough. The woman swallowed hard. "I didn't plan this," she said quickly. She ran ahead. Annie looked up at her mother. "I found him," she said proudly. "Just like you said, do heavens so." The woman's hands tightened slightly on Annie's shoulders. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again. "You weren't supposed to meet like this," she said softly. Jonathan looked from the woman to the child standing between them. "They told me you were dead," he said. "Both of you." Her jaw tightened. "They lied," she replied. "They paid people to lie." Jonathan shook his head once. "That's not possible," he said. "I was told you didn't survive the delivery, that the baby was a girl," she interrupted. "And she lived." She knelt slightly and reached for Annie's wrist. "Show him," she said. Annie nodded and slipped a bracelet off her arm. She held it up between them. Jonathan's breath caught. He knew it instantly. The leather strap, the worn clasp, the mark where it had once been scratched. "I gave that to you," he said. "Yes," the woman replied. "You told me to keep it." You said if you couldn't be there, it would remind her that you were real. Jonathan's mind raced backward through years he had sealed away. I was out of the country, he said. I never got a call. I never saw you. They made sure you wouldn't, she said. Your family found out I was pregnant. They bribed a nurse, changed my records, moved me to another ward. The official file says I died from complications, that my baby didn't survive. Jonathan stared at her. I grieved you, he said. I buried you in my mind. I know, she said quietly. I watched you on television. I saw your interviews. I told Annie you were important, that you were kind, even if you were far away. Jonathan looked down. Annie was watching him carefully. You don't look mad, she said. You look sad. He didn't answer. I waited, Annie continued. Mom said one day you'd see me and know. Jonathan Hale had never believed in fate, but standing in that hallway, looking at a child who carried his face and a woman who carried his past, he realized something terrifying. He had never thought he would be a father, but the truth had been waiting for him anyway, and it was no longer asking for permission. Jonathan Hale did not remember sitting down. One moment he was standing in the hospital corridor, the echo of Annie's voice still ringing in his ears, and the next he was in a narrow waiting room chair, his hands clasped together as if someone else had placed them there. Across from him, the woman he had once loved sat with her back straight, Annie pressed against her side. She kept one arm around the child. Not possessive, but instinctive, like someone who had learned long ago that the world could reach in and take what mattered if she looked away for even a second. Jonathan watched them in silence. So, he said finally, his voice quieter than he expected. You're alive. She gave a small, tired smile. I've been alive every day, she said. Just not in your world. I knew it. Annie looked between them, sensing the weight of the conversation even if she didn't understand all of it. You know each other? She asked. Jonathan hesitated. Yes, he said. A long time ago. Her mother glanced down at Annie. Sweetheart, why don't you sit over there and draw for a minute? She said gently. We need to talk. Annie frowned but nodded. She climbed into a chair near the wall, pulling a small notebook from her backpack. Before opening it, she looked back at Jonathan. You're not leaving, right? The question landed harder than any accusation. No, he said. I'm not leaving. I'm so. If this moment moved you even a little, if you felt the weight of that promise and the silence behind it, please take a second to like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments where you are watching, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about truth, justice, and the moments that change a life forever. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Only after Annie bent over her notebook did the woman speak again. My name is Mariah, she said. I don't know if that matters anymore. It matters, Jonathan replied. She studied his face, searching for something doubt, maybe, or cruelty. What she seemed to find instead made her shoulders relax slightly. I never planned to find you, Mariah said. Not like this. I didn't come here because of you. I came because the hospital finally agreed to correct some paperwork. Old birth records. Death certificates. Jonathan felt his jaw tighten. They told me you died, he said again. They told me you and the baby didn't make it. They told you what they needed you to believe, Mariah said. Your family had lawyers on standby before I even went into labor. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. My father, he said. Yes, he nodded once. He did not ask for details yet. Some part of him already knew them. I tried to reach you, Mariah continued, after I realized what they'd done. But your number was disconnected. Your office said you were overseas. Then there were stories about you on television expanding companies, awards, interviews. You looked untouchable. Jonathan opened his eyes. I wasn't, he said. I just didn't know. Mariah laughed softly, without humor. That's how power works, she said. It makes sure the right people never know. They sat with that for a moment. Annie's pencil scratched softly against paper. You named her Annie, Mariah said suddenly. Jonathan looked up. I did, he said. I remember. It's creasing. You said it like it mattered, she went on. You said if it was a girl, you wanted a name that sounded gentle but strong. something that wouldn't disappear. His throat tightened. She kept the bracelet, Mariah added. She wears it everywhere. I told her it was from her father. That one day, if she ever saw a man who looked like her and made her feel safe, she should trust her heart. Jonathan let out a slow breath. You taught her to find me, he said. No, Mariah replied. I taught her to recognize the truth. He looked toward Annie again. She was humming softly now, completely absorbed in her drawing. She's 6, Jonathan said. Yes, I missed everything. Mariah didn't argue. I wasn't going to let them take her, she said quietly. Not after what they did. I moved. I worked 2 jobs. I stayed invisible. Every time you came on television, she would stop and stare. She'd say, "That's him." Jonathan's hands tightened. And you never corrected her, he said. I never lied to her, Mariah answered. There's a difference. The door to the waiting room opened briefly. A nurse glanced inside, then moved on. The world kept functioning, unaware that Jonathan Hale's life had split cleanly in half. What do you want from me? He asked at last. Mariah met his eyes. I want you to know, she said. That's all. What you do with it is your choice. He shook his head. No, he said. That's not all. You didn't come here just for paperwork. Her expression hardened, just slightly. They changed her birth file. She said, if I don't fix it now, it stays that way forever. Officially, Annie never existed. And if something happens to me, she stopped. Jonathan understood. She'd have no one, he said. Mariah nodded. Jonathan stood up. Give me the file, he said. She hesitated only a second before reaching into her bag and pulling out a thick folder. She placed it in his hands. These are copies, she said. I kept the originals hidden. Jonathan flipped through the pages. Dates, names, altered signatures. A story rewritten by money and fear. This won't stand, he said. Mariah watched him carefully. You don't owe us anything, she said. I don't want you doing this out of guilt. Jonathan looked at Annie again. I'm not, he said. I'm doing it because it's true. Annie looked up at that moment, sensing the shift. Are we in trouble? She asked. Jonathan crouched in front of her, lowering himself to her eye level. No, he said gently. You're not in trouble. She studied him. Are you mad at my mom? No. Are you going to disappear? He swallowed. No, he said again, more firmly. I'm not. Annie considered this, then nodded as if filing it away. Okay, she said, returning to her drawing. Jonathan straightened. I'm going to have this investigated, he said to Mariah, quietly, thoroughly. Her eyes widened slightly. That could be dangerous, she said. I know, he replied. But what they did was worse. For the first time since he had seen her again, Mariah allowed herself to breathe. Outside the waiting room window, the late afternoon light shifted. Jonathan Hale had built his life on certainty, control, and distance. All of it had unraveled in less than an hour. And for the first time, he did not feel the need to put it back the way it was. Jonathan Hale did not leave the hospital alone. He insisted on walking Mariah and Annie to the lobby himself, though he kept a careful distance, as if afraid one wrong step might cause the moment to shatter. Annie walked between them, swinging her backpack lightly, unaware of how much the air around her had changed. Outside, the city moved as it always had, cars passing, people talking, life continuing without pause. Jonathan stopped near the glass doors. I need time, he said to Mariah, not to decide whether this is real. That part is done. I need time to do this the right way. Mariah nodded. She looked tired, but there was a steadiness in her posture Jonathan recognized from years ago. I don't want you showing up with cameras or lawyers tomorrow, she said. Annie doesn't need chaos. You won't see any of that, Jonathan replied. If anyone moves, it'll be quietly. Annie tugged lightly on his coat. You're really not leaving, she said. Jonathan looked down at her. No, he said, but I won't be around all the time yet. She accepted this with surprising calm. That's okay, she said. Grown-ups always say, yet, when they mean later. Mariah gave her daughter a small smile. Jonathan watched the exchange, a sharp ache settling somewhere deep in his chest. I'll call, he said to Mariah. Soon, She met his eyes. "We'll be here," she said. "We always are." They turned to leave. Annie glanced back once, lifted her hand in a small wave, then followed her mother out into the street. Jonathan stood alone for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. "Ethan," he said when the line connected, "I need you to drop everything." A pause. "No. This isn't business," Jonathan continued. "This is personal, and it's urgent." He listened, his jaw tightening. "Yes," he said. "I want records pulled. Hospital staff, 6 years ago. Birth files. Death certificates. Quietly. I don't care how much it costs." Another pause. "And Ethan," Jonathan added, "if my father's name comes up anywhere, you call me before you do anything else." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. That evening, Jonathan sat alone in his penthouse, the city lights stretching endlessly below the windows. He poured himself a drink out of habit, then left it untouched on the counter. His gaze kept drifting back to the bracelet Mariah had allowed him to hold for a moment before leaving. He had returned it to Annie, but the weight of it lingered in his hand. 6 years. 6 years of bedtime stories he hadn't read, questions he hadn't answered. A child who had grown up believing in him while he mourned ghosts. For the first time in decades, Jonathan Hale felt anger that had nowhere to go. Not the clean, strategic anger he used in boardrooms, but something older, something personal. His phone rang. "Talk to me," Jonathan said. Ethan's voice was low. "Careful, there are irregularities," he said. "More than I expected." A nurse was reassigned the same week. A supervisor signed off on documents she never handled before. "And Jonathan, there's a sealed memo referencing your family's legal office." Jonathan closed his eyes. "How deep?" he asked. "Deep enough that it wasn't a mistake," Ethan replied. "Someone wanted her erased." Was blast. Jonathan ended the call without another word. Across the city, Mariah tucked Annie into bed in their small apartment. Annie curled on her side, the bracelet wrapped loosely around her wrist. "Mom," she said sleepily. "Did I do something bad today?" Mariah brushed her hair back. "No, baby," she said. "You did something brave." Annie yawned. "Is Daddy sad?" Mariah hesitated, then answered honestly. "Yes," she said. "But sometimes, sadness means someone finally understands something important." Annie seemed satisfied. "He looked like he needed a hug," she murmured. Mariah swallowed. "Yes," she said softly. "He probably did." Back in his penthouse, Jonathan stood by the window, watching the city he had mastered so completely and realizing how little of it had ever truly belonged to him. He had spent his life believing control was the same as safety. Now he understood the difference. Jonathan Hale slept less than 2 hours that night. By dawn, his apartment felt too large, too quiet. He stood at the kitchen counter, black coffee untouched, scrolling through documents Ethan had sent over a secure channel. Names blurred together, administrators, nurses, legal intermediaries, but one pattern remained painfully clear. Nothing had happened by accident. His family's legal office had not merely intervened. They had orchestrated. At 7:30 sharp, Jonathan was in his car, heading toward his corporate headquarters. Not because of business he had canceled every meeting on his calendar, but because that was where Ethan worked, and Jonathan needed answers in person. Ethan was already waiting in Jonathan's private conference room when he arrived. Files spread neatly across the table. He looked up as Jonathan entered. "You look like hell," Ethan said. "I feel worse," Jonathan replied. "Start talking." "Do." Ethan pushed one file forward. "The nurse who signed off on the death record was paid through a shell account," he said. "The account traces back to a legal trust your father controls. Indirectly, but clearly." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "And Mariah?" he asked. "How did they move her?" "Administrative transfer," Ethan replied. "She was told there were complications, that she needed to be relocated. By the time she realized something was wrong, the official story was already written." Jonathan leaned back in his chair. "They buried a living woman," he said flatly. "Yes. And a child." "Yes." Silence settled between them. "Jonathan," Ethan said carefully, "if you pursue this openly, it will explode. Your father won't stay quiet." "I'm not pursuing this openly," Jonathan replied. "I'm pursuing it correctly." Ethan studied him. You're serious about acknowledging the child. She's my daughter, Jonathan said. There's nothing to acknowledge. That's the truth. Ethan nodded slowly. Then the first step is DNA confirmation, he said. Privately. No hospital. No records that can be accessed. Jonathan nodded. I'll arrange it, Ethan continued. But there's something else. He slid another document forward. This wasn't just about control, Ethan said. Your father believed the relationship itself was a liability. Interracial. Unplanned. Publicly inconvenient. Jonathan's hand stilled on the table. So he erased it, Jonathan said. Yes. Azad. Jonathan stood. Then we're done talking, he said. Start preparing. Across town, Mariah sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment, staring at her phone. It hadn't rung. She told herself that was fine. She hadn't expected it to not yet. Annie sat on the floor nearby, lining up toy animals with careful precision. Mom, she said, not looking up. Did I do something wrong? Mariah blinked. No, she said. Why would you think that? He hasn't called yet, Annie replied simply. Mariah's heart tightened. Sometimes adults need time, she said. Especially when they've just learned something big. Annie considered this. I gave him space, she said seriously. Just like you taught me. Mariah reached out and touched her daughter's shoulder. You did everything right, she said. That afternoon, Jonathan sent a single message to Mariah. Can we meet tonight? Somewhere quiet. She stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. Yes. They met in a small, understated restaurant near the river. No cameras. No staff who recognized him. Jonathan arrived early, chose a table in the corner, and waited. When Mariah walked in with Annie, Jonathan stood immediately. Annie spotted him and smiled. You came back, she said. I said I would, Jonathan replied. They sat. A server brought water and menus, then disappeared. Jonathan didn't touch the menu. I've confirmed what you told me, he said to Mariah. Not everything yet, but enough. Mariah held his gaze. And? She asked. And I want a DNA test, Jonathan said. For Annie. Privately. As soon as possible. Mariah nodded once. I expected that, she said. Annie looked between them. Is it like a science test? She asked. Jonathan smiled despite himself. Yes, he said. Something like that. Okay, Annie said. I'm good at science. Jonathan felt something twist in his chest. There's something else, he said to Mariah. If this confirms what we already know, I will move to correct everything. Legally, publicly, if necessary. Mariah's eyes hardened slightly. That will come with consequences, she said. For you. For us. I know, Jonathan replied. Which is why I won't do anything without your consent. That caught her off guard. You're giving me a choice, she said. Yes, he replied. You've been making them alone for 6 years. I won't take that from you. Annie swung her legs under the table. Can we get dessert? She asked. Jonathan laughed softly. Yes, he said. We can get dessert. As they shared a slice of cake, Jonathan watched Annie talk animatedly about school, about her favorite book, about a science project involving plants. He listened carefully, memorizing the sound of her voice. When they parted outside, Annie hugged him without hesitation. See you soon, Daddy, she said. The word no longer startled him. That night, Jonathan's phone rang as he stood on his balcony. His father's name lit the screen. Jonathan stared at it for several seconds before answering. Yes, he said. I hear you've been asking questions, his father said coldly. Yes, Jonathan replied. I have. A pause. You're digging into things that don't concern you, his father warned. They concern my daughter, Jonathan said evenly. Silence. Then, sharply, you should be careful. Jonathan looked out over the city. I've been careful my whole life, he said. It didn't protect anyone. The line went dead. Jonathan lowered the phone. The war he had avoided for decades had begun. Jonathan Hale did not tell Mariah about the call from his father. Not that night. Not the next morning. He learned quickly that some truths needed to be carried alone until they were strong enough to stand without breaking the people he was trying to protect. 2 days later, the DNA test was done. Quietly. No hospital logos. No government databases. a private lab Ethan trusted with his own life. Annie had treated it like an adventure, asking questions the entire time, fascinated by the small vial in the technician's gloves. "Is this how secrets are found?" she asked. Jonathan smiled, crouching beside her. "Sometimes," he said, "but the truth usually knows how to find its way out on its own." She nodded, satisfied with that answer. Now they waited. Jonathan returned to work only on the surface. Board meetings, financial calls, strategy sessions, his body was present, but his mind was elsewhere. Every report he read blurred into the same thought. 6 years. 6 years stolen by decisions made in quiet rooms by men who believed power excused everything. At night, Jonathan found himself replaying small moments from the past, things he had dismissed at the time. His father's sudden insistence that the relationship with Mariah was a distraction, the speed with which his legal team had moved after he left the country, the way the grief had been wrapped neatly for him, sealed, unquestionable. He had trusted that grief. That was the part he could not forgive himself for. Across town, Mariah moved through her days with a familiar caution. She walked Annie to school, worked her shift at a small community nonprofit, returned home to cook simple dinners. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. Annie talked about Jonathan constantly now, not obsessively, but naturally, like a fact that had always been true and simply waited to be acknowledged. "He drinks coffee like you," Annie told Mariah one evening. "But he forgets to eat." Mariah smiled faintly. "He always did that," she said. "You knew?" Annie asked. "I knew a different version of him," Mariah replied. "People change. Is he changing?" Annie pressed. Mariah paused. "Yes," she said honestly. "I think he is." I will down. The call came on a Thursday evening. Jonathan answered immediately. "It's conclusive," Ethan said. 99.99%. There's no ambiguity. Jonathan closed his eyes. "Thank you," he said. When he hung up, he didn't move for a long time. The city lights blinked on outside his office window. Indifferent and distant. He was a father, not in theory, not in memory. In fact, the weight of it did not crush him the way he had feared. Instead, it settled heavy. Yes, but grounding. Like something that had always belonged to him and was finally returned. He called Mariah. She answered on the second ring. "You know," she said before he could speak. "Yes," he replied. "I do." There was silence on the line, thick with years of restraint. "What happens now?" she asked. Jonathan didn't rush his answer. "Now," he said, "I protect my daughter." Mariah exhaled slowly. "My concern," she said, "is that when men like your father feel threatened, they don't stop at warnings." "I'm aware," Jonathan said. "Which is why I'm not acting emotionally." She almost laughed. "You," she said, "not acting emotionally?" "I'm acting deliberately," he corrected. "There's a difference." They agreed to meet the next evening. Not in public. At Mariah's apartment, Jonathan arrived without security, without a driver. He stood in the narrow hallway outside her door and waited. When it opened, Annie was there. "You came," she said. "I told you I would," Jonathan replied. She hugged him without asking. Jonathan froze for half a second, then wrapped his arms around her gently, as if afraid she might disappear if he held too tightly. Inside, the apartment smelled like dinner. Simple food. Familiar. Lived in. Mariah watched them quietly. After Annie retreated to her room to finish homework, Jonathan told Mariah everything. The DNA results, the financial trails, his father's call. Mariah listened without interrupting. "He won't give up control easily," she said when he finished. "I don't expect him to," Jonathan replied. "That's why I'm not confronting him yet." "What are you planning?" she asked. Jonathan met her eyes. "I'm documenting everything," he said. "Every payment, every signature, every falsified record. I want it airtight. Not for revenge, for accountability." "And Annie?" Mariah asked. Jonathan didn't hesitate. "She stays exactly where she is," he said. "With you. Her routine doesn't change unless you decide otherwise." Mariah studied him for a long moment. "You're serious about this?" she said. "Yes," he replied. "I missed 6 years. I won't steal her stability to make myself feel better." That answer mattered more than she expected. Later, Annie emerged with her notebook. "I drew something," she announced. She held it up. It was a simple picture. 3 figures, one tall, one medium, one small, holding hands. Jonathan's chest tightened. "That's us," Annie said matter-of-factly. "Yes," Jonathan said softly. "It is." That night, as Jonathan prepared to leave, Annie walked him to the door. "You're coming back," she said, not a question. "Yes," he answered. "When?" she pressed. "Soon," he said. "Very soon." She considered this, then nodded. "Okay," she said. "I'll wait." Jonathan stepped into the hallway, the door closing softly behind him. For the first time, the waiting was no longer his alone. Jonathan Hale increased security the following week, but not around himself. The protection went where it mattered. Mariah noticed it first in small ways. A different car parked across the street at odd hours. A man pretending to scroll his phone near Annie's school drop-off. A neighbor she had never seen before suddenly greeting her by name. Jonathan explained it quietly over dinner one evening. "They're not there to interfere," he said. "They're there to observe, and to make sure no one else does." Mariah didn't like it, but she understood. "You're expecting retaliation," she said. "I'm expecting pressure," Jonathan replied. "Pressure turns into mistakes." Annie listened while pushing peas around her plate. "Are we being guarded?" she asked. Jonathan smiled. "Think of it like umbrellas," he said. "You don't notice them until it rains." Annie nodded thoughtfully. "I like umbrellas," she decided. Behind the scenes, Jonathan moved with methodical patience. He met with forensic accountants who didn't ask questions, former prosecutors who had left government work disillusioned but sharp, investigators who knew how powerful families hid their sins and how those sins could be dragged into the light. Every document Ethan uncovered was scanned, duplicated, and stored in 3 separate places. Jonathan wasn't building a case. He was building insurance. At the same time, he did something that surprised everyone who worked for him. He left the office early, 3 days a week, without explanation. He used those hours to learn Annie's world. He sat quietly at a corner table during her after-school program, pretending to read while watching her concentrate fiercely on simple math problems. He listened as she corrected him patiently when he got an answer wrong. "You're thinking too fast," she told him. "Slow is smarter." Dan. He learned which foods she refused to eat and which stories calmed her when she couldn't sleep. He learned that she hated loud arguments and loved small routines. Mariah watched all of this carefully. Jonathan never overstepped. He didn't discipline Annie without asking Mariah first. He didn't make promises he wasn't prepared to keep. When Annie asked questions, he didn't know how to answer yet. He said so, honestly. That mattered. But the calm did not last. It never did. The first crack appeared as a letter. No return address, no signature. It arrived at Mariah's apartment while Annie was at school. Inside was a single page. "This arrangement is temporary. Children do not belong in adult conflicts. Choose wisely." Mariah's hands shook as she read it. When Jonathan arrived that evening, she handed it to him without a word. He read it once, then again, then folded it carefully. "This is intimidation," she said. "Isn't it?" "Yes," Jonathan replied. "And it's sloppy." That surprised her. "Sloppy?" she repeated. Jonathan nodded. "They want you scared," he said. "If they were confident, they'd stay silent." Mariah crossed her arms. "I won't run again," she said. "I won't teach Annie that fear decides her life." Jonathan met her gaze. "Neither will I," he said. That night, Jonathan finally confronted his father. Not in person, in writing. The message was brief, precise, unemotional. "I know what you did. I have proof. You will not contact Mariah or Annie again. Any further interference will be documented and escalated." There was no immediate response, but 2 hours later, Jonathan's phone rang. "You think you can threaten me?" his father demanded. Jonathan's voice was calm. "I'm not threatening you," he said. "I'm setting boundaries. You are embarrassing this family," his father snapped. "You already did," Jonathan replied. "I'm just correcting the record." A pause. Then, colder, "That child complicates things." Jonathan's hand tightened around the phone. "She is not a complication," he said. "She is my daughter." "You made a mistake," his father said. "I fixed it." Jonathan felt something in him settle, finally harden. "You committed a crime," he said. "Several. And you did it in my name. You won't destroy everything we built, his father warned. I'm not destroying anything, Jonathan said. I'm choosing what survives. He ended the call. The next morning, Annie woke up with a fever. It was nothing serious, the doctor said. A simple infection. But the sight of her flushed face and glassy eyes unraveled something deep inside Jonathan. He sat beside her bed while she slept, her small hand curled loosely around his finger. Mariah watched from the doorway. You don't have to stay, she said softly. I've done this before. I know, Jonathan replied. That's why I am staying. Annie stirred and opened her eyes. Daddy, she whispered. Yes, he said immediately. Don't fight, she murmured. It makes people mean. Jonathan leaned closer. I'll fight smart, he said, and I'll stop when it keeps you safe. She seemed satisfied and drifted back to sleep. That afternoon, Ethan arrived with bad news. Your father has started moving assets, he said, shifting funds, preparing for exposure. Jonathan nodded. He's getting ready, he said. For what? Ethan asked. Jonathan looked toward the bedroom where Annie slept. For war, he said quietly. But this war would not be fought with headlines or shouting matches. It would be fought with patience, with truth, and with a little girl who had unknowingly undone a lifetime of lies simply by saying one word in a hospital hallway. Daddy. The first move did not come with noise. It came with silence. Jonathan noticed it on a Tuesday morning when 2 scheduled meetings were abruptly canceled, meetings that had been confirmed less than 12 hours earlier. No explanation. No rescheduling. Just quiet withdrawals, like tides pulling back before something larger followed. By noon, Ethan confirmed what Jonathan already suspected. Your father is calling in favors, Ethan said over a secure line. Old ones. People who owe him. Boards, trustees, even a judge who shouldn't still be on the bench. Jonathan sat at his desk, hands folded, listening. He's not attacking you directly, Ethan continued. He's isolating you. Jonathan nodded. That's how he operates, Jonathan said. He doesn't confront, he suffocates. Across the city, Mariah felt it too, though she didn't yet know how to name it. The director at the nonprofit where she worked called her into the office late that afternoon. The conversation was polite, professional, but something underneath it was wrong. We've received concerns, the director said carefully, about potential media attention. Mariah's stomach tightened. I don't speak to the media, she replied. I know, the woman said. But your name has surfaced, and donors can be sensitive. Are you firing me? Mariah asked quietly. The director hesitated. No, she said. Not yet, but I need to be honest. If this escalates, I may not be able to protect your position. Granted, Mariah went home with the words still ringing in her ears. When Jonathan arrived that evening, he could see the strain on her face immediately. They're pushing you, she said before he could speak. At work, his jaw tightened. I'm sorry, he said. I was hoping to buffer that longer. Mariah shook her head. I don't regret this, she said. I just need to know how far this goes. Jonathan didn't answer right away. As far as it has to, he said finally. But no farther than Annie. I guess. Annie was sitting at the kitchen table, carefully cutting construction paper into uneven stars. Daddy, she said, not looking up. Why are people being weird? Jonathan crouched beside her. What do you mean? He asked. They whisper, she said. At school. When my mom picks me up. Mariah closed her eyes. Jonathan felt something sharp and cold settle in his chest. People whisper when they don't understand things, he said gently. It doesn't mean they're right. They're a mater. Annie considered this. Are they scared? She asked. Yes, Jonathan replied. Some of them are. Okay, Annie said, satisfied. Then they can whisper. I don't like loud people anyway. Later that night, after Annie was asleep, Jonathan met with Ethan again. We're close, Ethan said. Too close for your father's comfort. What's the next pressure point? Jonathan asked. Custody, Ethan replied. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. He wouldn't dare. He wouldn't care, Ethan corrected. He could argue instability, media exposure, claim you're unfit because you waited too long. Jonathan stood. He took 6 years from her, he said. He doesn't get one more minute. We can preempt it, Ethan said. But it requires something public. Jonathan turned. What? Acknowledgement, Ethan said. Not a press conference. Not yet. But legal recognition. On record. Jonathan knew what that meant. A name, a signature, a line crossed that could never be uncrossed. The next morning, Jonathan met Mariah at a small cafe near Annie's school. Annie was already inside with friends, oblivious to the gravity of what was about to be discussed. He may come for custody, Jonathan said without preamble. Mariah didn't flinch. I expected that, she said. Men like him don't lose quietly. I want to legally acknowledge Annie as my daughter, Jonathan said. Now. Before he moves, Mariah studied him. That makes you a target, she said, publicly. I already am, he replied. The difference is, this gives her protection. Mariah looked out the window toward the school entrance. You won't try to take her from me, she said. Jonathan shook his head. No, he said. I want to stand beside you, not in front of you. She searched his face for a long moment. When you walked away 6 years ago, she said, I decided I would never need you. I know, Jonathan said. And I won't ask you to need me now. She took a slow breath. Then do it, she said. But do it knowing there's no turning back. Jonathan nodded. I've already turned, he said. The paperwork was filed that afternoon. No announcement, no spectacle, just ink on paper. Jonathan Hale, father. That evening, Annie sensed something different the moment Jonathan walked in. You look taller, she said. He smiled faintly. Maybe I finally stood up straight, he replied. Mariah watched them from the doorway, a mixture of fear and relief twisting inside her chest. Across town, Jonathan's father received the notice less than an hour later. Legal acknowledgement, irrevocable. He read it twice. Then he smiled. So, he said, to no one in particular. He chose the child. He reached for his phone. Prepare the next phase, he said calmly. If he wants to be a father, let's see how much he's willing to lose. The war had crossed its first public line, and there would be no quiet endings now. Jonathan Hale understood something the moment the acknowledgement papers were filed. There would be no more neutral ground. The following days confirmed it. Reporters didn't show up at his office. No headlines appeared. No leaks hit the press. Instead, the pressure arrived through systems quiet, procedural, polite on the surface. A zoning permit for one of his developments was suddenly under review. A regulatory audit he had passed twice before was reopened. A longtime board ally postponed a meeting indefinitely. None of it was accidental. Ethan laid it out plainly during a late-night call. He's testing how much you're willing to absorb, Ethan said. Not to beat you, to exhaust you. Jonathan looked at the city through his office window, lights blinking like distant signals. He won't stop, Jonathan said. No, Ethan agreed. He's trying to remind you where power comes from. Jonathan ended the call and sat in silence. For years, he had believed power meant leverage money, influence, silence. He had inherited that belief without questioning it. Now, every move his father made confirmed the cost of that inheritance. Across town, Mariah felt the tension tighten around her life. The letter from the nonprofit arrived on Friday afternoon. It was careful in its wording. Apologetic. Temporary. We believe it's best if you take a leave of absence until the situation stabilizes. Was copying of Tudias. Mariah folded the letter slowly and placed it on the table. Annie was coloring nearby. Mom, Annie said, glancing up. Why do people stop smiling when they talk to you on the phone? Mariah hesitated, then chose honesty. Because sometimes grown-ups are afraid of things they don't understand, she said. Like monsters? Annie asked. Like the dark, Mariah replied. Annie nodded, accepting this. That's okay, she said. I'm not scared of the dark anymore. I was not. Mariah smiled, though her chest ached. That evening, Jonathan arrived earlier than usual. He noticed the letter immediately. They're pushing you out, he said quietly. Yes, Mariah replied. Softly. For now, Jonathan's jaw tightened. I can step in, he said. Financially, legally. Mariah looked at him. I won't be owned again, she said. Not by your father, not by you. Jonathan nodded. I know, he said. That's why I won't offer unless you ask. Annie looked between them. Is this about me? She asked. Jonathan crouched beside her. This is about adults forgetting how to behave, he said. Not about you. Annie frowned. Then why do they keep using my name? Jonathan paused. Because you matter, he thought. Because you shouldn't. Out loud, he said. Because some people think children are easier to move than truth. Annie considered this. That's silly, she said. Truth is heavy. Jonathan felt something warm and painful settle behind his eyes. That night, Jonathan received an invitation, not from his father, from the family attorney, private dinner. No agenda listed. Jonathan knew what it was, a chance to negotiate, to redefine terms, to trade silence for stability. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he drove. Not to his penthouse, not to his office. He drove past Mariah's apartment, slowed, then parked across the street. He sat there longer than he intended, watching lights flicker on and off in windows, watching people live lives that had nothing to do with power. Annie's bedroom light clicked on, then off. Jonathan exhaled. When he returned home, he replied to the invitation with a single line. I'll come, alone. The dinner was held in a private room of an old steakhouse his family favored. Dark wood, low lighting, familiar territory. His father was already seated when Jonathan arrived. You look tired, his father said. Jonathan took the seat across from him. I am, he replied, but not confused. His father smiled thinly. You've made this very difficult, he said. Jonathan didn't argue. You've complicated your own position, his father continued. Public acknowledgement was reckless. It was necessary, Jonathan replied. For whom? His father asked. For my daughter, Jonathan said. And for me. His father's expression hardened. You're choosing emotion over legacy. No, Jonathan said calmly. I'm choosing responsibility over comfort. His father leaned back. You think this ends well? He asked. You think the world rewards men who undermine their own blood? Jonathan met his gaze. I think the world punishes men who bury it, he said. Silence stretched between them. I can make this go away, his father said at last. The scrutiny, the pressure, her problems. Jonathan stood. If you touch them again, he said evenly, I will release everything. Not strategically, not gradually, all at once. His father studied him, searching for hesitation. He found none. Jonathan left without shaking hands. The following morning, Ethan confirmed what Jonathan had already sensed. He's regrouping, Ethan said. That dinner wasn't an olive branch. It was a measurement. Jonathan nodded. Then we moved to the next phase, he said. At school that afternoon, Annie's teacher pulled Mariah aside. Annie has been very focused lately, she said. Serious. She talks about fairness a lot. Mariah smiled faintly. That runs in the family, she said. That evening, Annie handed Jonathan a folded piece of paper. I wrote something, she said. Jonathan opened it. It was a sentence, carefully printed. If someone is bigger than you, it doesn't mean they get to decide who you are. Jonathan looked at her. Where did you learn that? He asked. Annie shrugged. I just know it, she said. Jonathan folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket. For the first time since this began, he felt something close to certainty again. Not the old kind, a better one. Jonathan Hale learned that once power realized it was being challenged, it stopped pretending to be polite. The first public leak appeared 3 days later. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't even inaccurate. That was the point. A small financial blog ran a brief piece questioning Jonathan's recent personal decisions and how they might affect long-term corporate stability. No names were mentioned. No accusations made. Just enough suggestion to invite speculation. By noon, the story had been quietly amplified. Ethan called within minutes. He's shaping the narrative, Ethan said. Not attacking you. Reframing you. Jonathan stood by the window of his office, watching traffic crawl below. As unstable, Jonathan said. As distracted, Ethan agreed. As compromised. Jonathan exhaled slowly. And Annie? For now, she's invisible, Ethan said. But that won't last if this escalates. Jonathan ended the call and remained still for a long moment. He had always known this would come. What surprised him was how little it frightened him compared to how much it angered him. That evening, Jonathan went to Annie's school for a scheduled parent meeting. It was his first time attending one under his own name. He arrived early and waited in the small chair outside the classroom, hands folded, posture controlled. Parents came and went, offering polite nods. A few recognized him. Most didn't. Annie's teacher, Miss Carter, greeted him warmly. "You must be Jonathan," she said. "Annie talks about you." Jonathan smiled faintly. "I hope that's a good thing," he replied. Miss Carter laughed softly. "She talks about fairness," she said. "About how adults don't always listen. But they should." Jonathan nodded. "That sounds like her." During the meeting, Miss Carter showed him Annie's recent work. Her handwriting was careful, deliberate. Her drawings often showed people holding hands, standing in lines, sharing space. "She's observant," Miss Carter said. "Sometimes children who grow up needing to pay attention develop that skill early." Jonathan felt a familiar sting of guilt. When the meeting ended, Annie ran up to him, her backpack bouncing. "You came," she said. "I said I would," he replied. She looked pleased. On the walk home, she skipped ahead, then slowed to match his stride. "Mom says people are talking," Annie said casually. Jonathan kept his voice even. "People talk about many things," he said. "Are they talking about you?" she asked. "Yes." "Are they saying mean things?" Jonathan considered how much truth a 6-year-old deserved. "They're saying things they don't understand," he said. "Sometimes people do that when they're afraid of losing control." Annie frowned. "Why would they lose control?" Jonathan looked down at her. "Because the truth doesn't ask permission," he said. She seemed to like that. That night, Mariah showed Jonathan her phone. Messages from unknown numbers, vague warnings, concerned questions disguised as advice. "Friends of friends," she said. "People who suddenly care a lot." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "They're circling," he said. Mariah leaned against the counter. "I won't disappear again," she said. "If that's what they're hoping." Jonathan met her gaze. "I won't let them force you," he said. "But I need you to tell me if it becomes too much." She nodded. "I will," she said, "before it breaks Annie." Later, after Annie was asleep, Jonathan made another call. This one was not to Ethan. It was to a woman named Ruth Alvarez. She answered on the third ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said. "You said you didn't want to be involved unless it mattered," Jonathan replied. Ruth had spent 20 years as a federal investigator before leaving under circumstances Jonathan had never asked about. "This matters," she said. "I need an independent review," Jonathan said. "No paper trail, no favors." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "You're talking about your family," she said. "Yes. And you're prepared for what comes out?" Jonathan thought of Annie's handwriting, her certainty. "Yes," he said. "All right," Ruth replied. "I'll start where money meets silence. That's usually where the bodies are buried." The next morning, Jonathan's father made his move. A formal letter arrived at Jonathan's office, stamped with the seal of a family trust. It expressed concern. It suggested mediation. It implied that prolonged conflict could result in unnecessary exposure for all parties involved, especially minors. Jonathan read it once, then handed it to Ethan. "He's testing whether you'll flinch," Ethan said. Jonathan shook his head. "He's threatening my daughter," Jonathan replied. "He just doesn't realize that crossed the last line." IDO. That afternoon, Annie came home unusually quiet. "What happened?" Mariah asked gently. Annie shrugged. "A kid said I shouldn't talk about my dad," she said. "Because he's trouble." Mariah's heart clenched. "And what did you say?" she asked. Annie looked up. "I said trouble is when you lie and pretend it's normal." Jonathan, who had just entered the room, stopped short. He walked over and knelt in front of Annie. "You did nothing wrong," he said carefully. "But I want you to tell me when things like that happen." Annie nodded. "Okay," she said. "I don't like secrets anyway." That night, Jonathan stood on his balcony. The city spread out below him. Ruth's message came through just before midnight. "Found something. Hospital administrator. Offshore account. Your father's name isn't on it, but his shadow is." Jonathan closed his eyes. The pieces were aligning. The truth was no longer buried. It was waiting, and soon, it would demand to be seen. Jonathan Hale read the first draft of Ruth Alvarez's findings just before sunrise. He sat at the small table in his kitchen, jacket still on, tie loosened, untouched coffee cooling beside him. The document was concise, factual, stripped of emotion. the kind of writing that assumed the reader could handle the truth without cushioning. He could. The hospital administrator who had overseen maternity records 6 years ago had resigned abruptly 3 months after Annie's birth. No scandal, no investigation, just a quiet transition into consulting. Payments followed. Not directly, never directly. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, a familiar pattern. Ruth's note at the end was brief. This wasn't about a single decision. It was a system doing what it was designed to do. Protect power, erase inconvenience. Jonathan closed the file. For years, he had believed systems were neutral, efficient, necessary. Now he saw what Mariah had always known. Systems reflected the people who controlled them. He arrived at Mariah's apartment later that morning with groceries he didn't need and information he hadn't yet decided how to share. Annie was already dressed for school, sitting at the table with her homework spread neatly in front of her. "Good morning," Jonathan said. Annie looked up and smiled. "You're early," she said. "I wanted to be," he replied. Mariah watched him carefully as she poured coffee. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Not much," Jonathan admitted. Annie packed her backpack and stood. "Are we still walking together?" she asked. "Yes," Jonathan said. "If you want." She nodded, satisfied. On the walk to school, Annie skipped between them, pointing out cracks in the sidewalk she pretended were rivers. Jonathan listened more than he spoke. At the school gate, Annie stopped suddenly and turned to him. "Daddy," she said, lowering her voice. "Are you fighting?" Jonathan crouched slightly so he was level with her. "Yes," he said honestly. "But not with my hands." "Good," Annie said. "Hands are for holding, not hurting." She hugged him quickly, then ran inside. Jonathan remained still for a moment after she disappeared. "That," Mariah said softly, "is why I worry." "I know," Jonathan replied. "That's why I'm careful." They walked back toward the apartment. "I need to tell you something," Jonathan said. Mariah waited. "I've confirmed that what happened wasn't isolated," he continued. "It wasn't one nurse, or one lie. It was coordinated." Mariah's jaw tightened. "By your family," she said. "Yes. And now?" "Now," Jonathan said, "I decide when this stops being quiet." She looked at him sharply. "You're thinking about going public." "I'm thinking about control," he replied. "Who has it, and who shouldn't?" Mariah folded her arms. "If you go public," she said, "they'll come for me harder." Jonathan met her gaze. "I won't do it without you," he said. "And I won't do it if it costs Annie her peace." Mariah studied him for a long moment. "You're different," she said finally. Jonathan didn't argue. "I don't know if that's enough," she added. "It may have to be," he replied. That afternoon, Jonathan received another message from his father's attorney. This one less polite, more direct. "We urge you to reconsider your current course. There are consequences that cannot be undone." Jonathan deleted it. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He called his father directly. "This ends," Jonathan said when the line connected. His father laughed softly. "You finally sound like a Hale," he said. "No," Jonathan replied. "I sound like a father." Silence stretched between them. "You think that child changes everything," his father said. "She changes what matters," Jonathan replied. "You're gambling your legacy," his father warned. Jonathan's voice remained steady. "I'm redefining it." That evening, Annie came home unusually quiet again. She sat at the table and drew without speaking. Jonathan watched her for several minutes before kneeling beside her. "What happened today?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Someone said my dad is dangerous," she said. Jonathan felt a familiar anger rise, but he held it back. "And what do you think?" he asked. Annie paused, then shrugged. "I think dangerous people hide," she said. "You don't." Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. Mariah watched the exchange from the doorway, her heart tight. That night, after Annie was asleep, Jonathan and Mariah sat together in the living room. "I'm going to file a formal request to reopen the hospital investigation," Jonathan said, independently, with oversight. Mariah nodded. "And when they push back?" she asked. "They will," he said. "That's when I decide how much light to use." Mariah exhaled slowly. "I won't run," she said. "But I won't let Annie be used as leverage." "She won't be," Jonathan replied. "Not again." Outside, the city hummed. unaware of the fault line widening beneath it. Jonathan Hale had crossed a threshold he could not retreat from. The truth was no longer something he was uncovering. It was something he was preparing to defend. Jonathan Hale learned the limits of quiet power within 48 hours. The request to reopen the hospital investigation was filed at dawn, routed through independent legal counsel and supported by affidavits that left little room for dismissal. By noon, 3 people he had never met had called him, each offering friendly advice about patience, discretion, and the value of letting the past rest. By evening, his father's silence had become louder than any threat. Jonathan sat in his temporary office overlooking the river, hands folded, listening as Ruth Alvarez spoke through the secure line. "They're circling," she said. "Not aggressively. Not yet. But the pressure is coordinated." Jonathan stared out the window. "That means they're afraid," he replied. "Or confident," Ruth countered. "Confidence can be just as dangerous." Jonathan acknowledged this with a nod she could not see. "Any movement at the hospital?" he asked. "Yes," Ruth said. 2 former administrators have retained counsel. 1 nurse has suddenly left the state." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "And the records?" "Still sealed," Ruth replied. "But the seal is thinner than they think." After the call ended, Jonathan remained seated, thinking not of strategy, but of Annie's face when she asked if he was fighting. He had promised her he would use no hands. That evening, Mariah received an unexpected call at work. The number was unfamiliar. The voice on the other end was polite, female, measured. "Miss Collins," the woman said. "My name is Evelyn Wright. I represent the Hale Family Trust." Mariah closed her office door. "I don't speak to your family," she replied evenly. "I understand," Evelyn said. "That's why I'm calling quietly." Mariah felt the old tension return, coiling in her chest. "What do you want?" she asked. "To ensure a smooth transition," Evelyn said. "There are ways to resolve misunderstandings without public consequences." "There is no misunderstanding," Mariah said. "There is a child." A pause. "Yes," Evelyn replied. "And children benefit from stability." Mariah's voice hardened. "Children benefit from truth," she said. "And from adults who don't erase them." The call ended shortly after. That night, Mariah told Jonathan everything. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. "They're moving earlier than I expected," he said. "You promised Annie peace," Mariah reminded him. "I promised protection," Jonathan replied. "Peace sometimes comes later." Mariah studied him. "You're preparing for escalation." "Yes," Jonathan admitted. "And you didn't tell me." Jonathan met her gaze. "I needed to be sure first," he said, "that you would stand." Mariah's answer was quiet but firm. "I've been standing for 6 years. 2/22/19 free 30. Later, after Annie was asleep, Jonathan sat beside her bed longer than necessary. Her breathing was even. Her small hand curled loosely around the bracelet. He thought of the word legacy. It had always meant assets, influence, continuity. Now it meant something far more fragile. The next morning, Annie came home from school with a folded piece of paper. "I drew something," she announced. Jonathan unfolded it. It was a picture of 3 figures holding hands. One tall, one medium, one small. Above them, in uneven letters, she had written, "Safe." Jonathan swallowed. "Is this us?" he asked. "Yes," Annie said, "but only if you don't go away." "I'm not going anywhere," Jonathan said. "Grown-ups say that," Annie replied. "But then they leave." Jonathan knelt in front of her. "Then I won't say it," he said. "I'll show it." Annie considered this, then nodded. That afternoon, the first leak appeared. A minor financial outlet published a vague piece about internal conflicts within legacy conglomerates, hinting at moral disputes and generational divides. No names, no details. But the timing was deliberate. Jonathan read it once and closed the tab. "They're testing the narrative," he told Ruth later. "Seeing what sticks." "Do you want me to shut it down?" she asked. "No," Jonathan said. "Let it breathe." That night, Jonathan received a message from his father. "Come tomorrow. Alone." Jonathan showed it to Mariah. She exhaled slowly. "He won't give up control quietly," she said. "I'm not asking him to," Jonathan replied. "I'm telling him it's over." "And if he threatens Annie?" Mariah asked. Jonathan's eyes hardened. Then this stops being a negotiation. The meeting was set for the following afternoon. Jonathan spent the morning with Annie, taking her to the park, pushing her on the swing, listening as she explained the rules of a game she invented on the spot. "You're not very good at this," she told him seriously. "I'm learning," Jonathan replied. She smiled. "That's okay," she said. "Learning means you'll stay." As he watched her run ahead, Jonathan understood something with painful clarity. Power had never been the problem. Fear was. Fear of loss, fear of exposure, fear of being seen. He had lived inside that fear for most of his adult life. Now, for the first time, he was stepping outside it. Tomorrow would bring confrontation. Tonight, he stayed. Jonathan Hale arrived at the private residence just outside the city precisely at 4 in the afternoon. The house had not changed. Same iron gate, same long gravel drive, same deliberate isolation. It was designed to keep the world out, or to keep secrets in. Jonathan had grown up believing it was a fortress. Today, it felt like a museum of decisions that no longer held authority over him. His father was waiting in the study. Minho Hale stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, posture straight despite his age. He did not turn immediately when Jonathan entered. "You're late," Minho said calmly. "I'm on time," Jonathan replied. Minho turned then, his expression unreadable. "You've made yourself very visible lately," he said. "That's not wise." Jonathan removed his coat and placed it on the chair without sitting. "I didn't come for advice," he said. Minho gestured toward the armchair opposite the desk. Jonathan remained standing. Silence stretched. "You embarrassed this family," Minho said at last. "Reopening old records, stirring questions that were settled." "They were buried," Jonathan replied. "There's a difference." Minho's jaw tightened slightly. "You think you discovered something new," he said. "You didn't. You just decided to look at it." Jonathan met his father's gaze. "You ordered it," Jonathan said. "Not a question." Minho did not deny it. "She was a liability," he said. "Unplanned, unstable. The child complicated matters." "She is not a matter," Jonathan said quietly. "She is my daughter." Minho studied him. "You always confuse emotion with reality," he said. "Power requires distance." Jonathan shook his head. "No," he said. "Power requires accountability. Distance is just how you avoid it." Minho's voice cooled. "You owe everything you have to this family." Jonathan nodded. "And now," he said, "I'm paying it back." He reached into his bag and placed a slim folder on the desk. "Affidavits," Jonathan said. "Independent reviews, financial trails, hospital testimonies. Enough to raise questions you won't be able to silence." Minho did not open the folder. "You would destroy us," he said. Jonathan's voice did not rise. "I would correct us," he said. "What survives after that is what deserves to." Minho turned away, looking out the window again. "You think this child will save you," he said. "Children don't save men like us. They expose us." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Exactly." Minho's voice sharpened. "You put her in danger by acknowledging her." "No," Jonathan replied. "You put her in danger by pretending she didn't exist." Another long silence followed. Finally, Minho spoke again, slower this time. "If you proceed," he said, "you are no longer under my protection." Jonathan nodded once. "I know. 2. You will lose access," Minho continued. "Capital, influence, allies." Jonathan thought of Annie's drawing. The word safe, written above 3 uneven figures. "I've already gained something more valuable," he said. Minho turned, searching his son's face for hesitation. He found none. "Leave," Minho said at last. Jonathan did. Outside, the late afternoon light felt strangely gentle. As he drove away, Jonathan realized he felt lighter than he had in years. That evening, Mariah was waiting when he returned. She read his face before he spoke. "It's done," she said. "Yes," Jonathan replied. "He knows I won't back down." Mariah exhaled slowly. "And now?" "Now," Jonathan said, "they decide whether they want to negotiate or be exposed." Annie emerged from her room, holding a book. "Did you win?" she asked. Jonathan crouched to her level. "I didn't lose," he said. She considered this. "That's good," she said. "Losing makes people mean." "Everyone." Jonathan smiled. Later that night, The first formal response arrived, a cease and desist letter, carefully worded, legally hollow, designed to intimidate. Jonathan read it once, then handed it to Ruth. "They're nervous," Ruth said. "They should be," Jonathan replied. The following morning, a former nurse agreed to speak. Not on record, not yet, but she spoke. She described being told to change files, being offered money she didn't ask for, being warned, gently at first, then firmly, that some names were better left unspoken. She cried. Mariah said after hearing the account. "She's lived with this for years." "So have we," Jonathan replied. The story was no longer theoretical. It was human. That afternoon, Annie came home excited. "We're doing family trees at school," she announced. Jonathan felt his chest tighten. "And?" he asked. "I said I have a mom and a dad," Annie said. "And a grandpa. I don't see much." Mariah watched Jonathan carefully. "That was brave," Jonathan said. Annie shrugged. "It's just true," she said. Truth doesn't need to be loud. That night, Jonathan drafted a statement he hoped he would never have to release. It was simple, direct, unapologetic. He read it once, saved it, and closed the file. Somewhere in the city, plans were being made without him. He knew that. But for the first time, he also knew something else. They were reacting. He was acting. The hearing room was colder than Jonathan expected. Not in temperature, but in tone. The walls were pale, undecorated, designed to give nothing away. Justice, he had learned, rarely looked dramatic in real life. It looked administrative, neutral, almost indifferent. Jonathan sat at the long table beside his legal team, hands folded, posture calm. Across the room, representatives from the state medical board, the hospital system, and two attorneys who very clearly did not want to be there shuffled papers and avoided eye contact. Behind him, Mariah sat in the second row, Annie beside her. Jonathan had hesitated about bringing Annie, but Annie had insisted. "I should be there," she had said the night before. "This is about me too." He had knelt in front of her, looking into her serious eyes. "You don't have to carry this," he told her. "I know," Annie replied, "but I want to." Now she sat quietly, feet not touching the floor, hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple navy dress Mariah had chosen. No jewelry, no bracelet. The bracelet was in Jonathan's pocket. The chairperson cleared her throat. "We are here to review allegations of record tampering, coercion, and misconduct related to a birth registered 6 years ago at Mercy Hills Hospital," she said. "Mr. Jonathan Hale, you may proceed." Jonathan stood. He did not rush. "My name is Jonathan Hale," he began. "I'm here as a father, not as a financier. Everything else is secondary." A few pens paused. "My daughter, Annie Hale, was born in this hospital," he continued. "According to the records, she did not survive. According to reality, she did." He let that sentence sit. "For 6 years, Jonathan said, I lived believing my child was dead. Her mother lived believing she had no legal proof, and my daughter grew up believing her father had abandoned her." Mariah's hand tightened around Annie's. Jonathan reached into his jacket and placed the bracelet on the table. "I gave this to her mother before Annie was born," he said. "It was meant to be a promise." He slid a second item forward. "These are the original intake forms, obtained through independent review. You'll notice alterations, signatures changed, timestamps adjusted." The chairperson leaned forward. "We've reviewed those documents," she said. "Please continue." Jonathan nodded. "The question before this board is not whether a mistake occurred," he said. "It's whether power was used to erase a child." A murmur rippled through the room. Jonathan turned slightly, gesturing toward Annie. "This is the consequence," he said. "Not a scandal, not a headline. A child who existed whether it was convenient or not." The opposing counsel stood. "Mr. Backed, Hale," the man said smoothly. "With respect, you are implying intent without direct." "I am implying responsibility," Jonathan interrupted, his voice still calm. "Intent will be decided by investigators. Responsibility belongs here." The chairperson raised a hand, silencing the exchange. "Miss Brooks," she said, turning to Mariah. "You may speak." Mariah stood. She had rehearsed nothing. I was 23, she said. I was scared, and I trusted the hospital. When I woke up, they told me my baby died. They didn't even let me see her. Her voice wavered, then steadied. They moved me. They changed my paperwork. And when I asked questions, they told me to be grateful I was alive. She looked directly at the panel. I was poor. He was powerful. I didn't think the truth mattered. She glanced back at Annie. I was wrong. Silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, a woman stood from the far end of the room. I'd like to submit a statement, she said. The chairperson frowned. Name? Elaine Porter, the woman replied. Former charge nurse? Mercy Hills. Jonathan's heart thudded once. Elaine's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. I was told to reassign a patient after delivery, she said. I was told the baby did not survive, and the mother should not ask questions. She swallowed. I was offered money. I refused. Then I was threatened with losing my license. Gasps followed. I've lived with that for 6 years, Elaine continued. I'm tired of being quiet. The hearing adjourned less than an hour later. The decision would not be immediate, but the shift was undeniable. Outside, reporters waited. Jonathan ignored them. He knelt in front of Annie instead. You okay? He asked. She nodded. They listened, she said. Yes, Jonathan replied. They did. That evening, the news broke anyway. Not from Jonathan, from someone else. The headline spread fast. Hospital under investigation for alleged birth record manipulation. Jonathan turned off the television. Is Grandpa going to be mad? Annie asked softly. Jonathan considered the question. Probably, he said. But sometimes people are mad because they're afraid. Of what? Of losing control, he replied. Annie thought about this. I don't like control, she said. I like being safe. Jonathan smiled faintly. So do I. And later that night, Jonathan received a call. A private number. He stepped into the study. I assume you saw the news, his father's voice said. I did, Jonathan replied. You've crossed a line, Minho said. Jonathan's tone did not change. You crossed it first, he said. I'm just pointing at it. A pause. She will bring you nothing but complications, Minho said. The child. Jonathan's jaw tightened. She brings clarity, he said. That frightens you. Another pause. This is not over, Minho said. No, Jonathan agreed. It's just finally honest. When the call ended, Jonathan stood alone for a moment. Then he returned to the living room. Annie was asleep on the couch, head on Mariah's shoulder, clutching the bracelet Jonathan had returned to her wrist earlier that day. For the first time since the truth surfaced, Jonathan allowed himself to believe something fragile and dangerous. That justice, slow and imperfect, might actually arrive. Not loudly, but unmistakably. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded once, no logo on the envelope. Jonathan recognized the handwriting immediately. His father never used messengers when he wanted something to feel personal. Jonathan stood by the kitchen counter, coffee cooling beside him, reading the single page slowly. Come alone, noon. The old house. No signature was necessary. Mariah watched him from the doorway. He wants to talk, she said. He wants to control, Jonathan replied. Is there a difference? She asked gently. Jonathan folded the letter. Not to him, he said, but there is to me. Annie looked up from the table. Crayons scattered around her. Are you going somewhere? She asked. Yes, Jonathan said. Her brow furrowed. Will you come back? He didn't answer right away. He crossed the room, knelt beside her chair, and met her eyes. Always, he said. That's not something I negotiate anymore. She nodded, satisfied. At noon, Jonathan drove alone. The old house sat exactly where it always had, perched above the city like it was watching rather than belonging. Staff were absent. No cars in the drive. Minho had planned this carefully. Jonathan let himself in. His father was seated at the dining table, a place once reserved for formal guests and silent meals. Tea was already poured. You came, Minho said. I said I would, Jonathan replied, taking the opposite seat. Minho studied him. You look different, he said. Less distracted. I am, Jonathan replied. There's less to pretend about now. Minho poured more tea, hands steady. The investigation will be unpleasant, he said. For everyone. That's usually how truth behaves, Jonathan said. Minho's eyes narrowed slightly. You could still stop this, he said, publicly, quietly. We handle the rest. Jonathan leaned back. And Annie? He asked. Minho waved a hand. She can be provided for, discreetly. Away. Jonathan's voice hardened. She's not a transaction. Minho's tone sharpened in response. She is a vulnerability. Jonathan leaned forward. She's a responsibility, he said. One you tried to erase. Silence fell. Minho broke it first. You think the world will applaud you, he said. They won't. They'll use you. And when they're done, they'll move on. Jonathan nodded. I know, he said. I'm not doing this for applause. Then why? Minho demanded. Jonathan didn't answer immediately. He thought of Annie asking if losing made people mean. Of Mariah standing in that hearing room, voice steady despite years of fear. Of himself believing for 6 years that a part of him was buried. Because silence cost too much, Jonathan said. And I can afford to speak now. Minho's jaw tightened. You've chosen her over us, he said. Jonathan met his gaze. I chose not to abandon her again, he said. The rest is your interpretation. We got doubts. Minho stood abruptly. You will regret this, he said. When allies vanish, when doors close, Jonathan stood as well. Then I'll knock on different doors, he said. Minho looked at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, his voice softened. She looks like you, he said quietly. Jonathan paused. Yes, he said. She does. Minho turned away. I never wanted grandchildren to be born in chaos, he said. Jonathan answered evenly. Chaos happens when people with power decide other lives are inconvenient. When Jonathan left the house, he felt no triumph, only clarity. That afternoon, the second wave hit. A civil suit was filed, not by Jonathan, by 3 former patients of Mercy Hills. The pattern was unmistakable. Ruth called within minutes. This just went from isolated to systemic, she said. Good, Jonathan replied. Patterns are harder to dismiss. That evening, Annie was quiet. She sat on the floor, drawing. Jonathan noticed the paper was different, not stick figures. It showed a house, 2 adults, 1 child. The adults were holding hands. The child stood between them. Who's that? Jonathan asked carefully. Annie didn't look up. That's me, she said. That's Mommy. That's you. Jonathan swallowed. Where are you? He asked. In the middle, Annie said. That's where kids go when they're safe. Later that night, a knock came at the door. A man stood there, mid-50s, wearing a worn jacket and regret in his eyes. My name is Thomas Reed, he said. I worked hospital administration. I was told you might want to hear from me. Jonathan stepped aside. Thomas sat stiffly, hands clasped. I signed off on a transfer, he said. 6 years ago, I was told it was standard. Later, I realized it wasn't. Why come now? Jonathan asked. Thomas's voice broke slightly. My granddaughter was born last year, he said. I watched her sleep, and I thought about what I helped take from someone else. Jonathan listened. When Thomas left, the house felt heavier, but truer. That night, Jonathan wrote Annie a letter. Not for now. For later. For the day she asked harder questions. He sealed it and placed it in a drawer. Above it, he placed the bracelet. A promise. Returned and reclaimed. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, a family was being rebuilt slowly, imperfectly, honestly. And somewhere between public reckoning and private repair, Jonathan understood something his father never had. Legacy wasn't what survived your name. It was what survived your choices. The morning after Thomas Reed's visit, Jonathan woke before dawn. He lay still for a moment, listening. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the city outside and the faint, steady breathing coming from Annie's room. That sound, soft, uneven, undeniably alive, had become his anchor. For years, he had woken to silence and believed it was normal. Now, silence felt like a warning. He rose, made coffee, and stood by the window as the sky lightened. By 8 o'clock, the first call came, then the second. By noon, the story had shifted again. This time, it wasn't about Mercy Hills. It was about the Hale Group. Jonathan sat at the conference table with Ruth and two external advisors. A large screen displayed a financial news channel on mute, a scrolling headline repeating the same phrase over and over. Investors question Hale Group governance amid family controversy. They're testing you, Ruth said calmly. They want to see if you'll flinch. Jonathan nodded. They always do, he replied. When power feels threatened, an advisor leaned forward. Your father still holds significant influence. If he signals instability, then the market panics, Jonathan finished. I know the script. He closed the folder in front of him. We respond with transparency, he said. Nothing defensive, nothing emotional. Ruth studied him. That's new, she said. Jonathan allowed himself a faint smile. I've learned who I'm answering to now. That afternoon, Jonathan recorded a short statement. No press conference, no grand gestures, just a camera, neutral background, and a measured voice. I won't comment on ongoing investigations, he said, but I will say this. Accountability isn't a threat to legitimate business, it's the foundation of it. He paused, then added, and family isn't a liability, it's a responsibility. The video went live. The response was immediate. Support, criticism, speculation, all colliding at once. Jonathan turned off his phone and went home early. Annie was at the table with Mariah, doing homework. She looked up when he entered. You're back early, she said. Yes, Jonathan replied. I wanted to be. She nodded, accepting this without question. What did you do today? He asked. I learned about Harriet Tubman, Annie said. She helped people escape even when it was dangerous. Mariah glanced at Jonathan. What did you learn? Annie asked him. Jonathan considered this carefully. That sometimes doing the right thing makes powerful people uncomfortable, he said. And that doesn't mean it's wrong. Annie thought about this. Harriet didn't stop, she said. No, Jonathan agreed. She didn't. That evening, Jonathan received an unexpected call. Not from his father, from the board. The chairwoman's voice was composed, professional. We're convening an emergency session tomorrow, she said. Your father has proposed a leadership review. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. I expected that, he said. There's concern, she continued. About distraction, Jonathan smiled faintly. There always is when people without answers prefer silence, he said. After the call, Jonathan sat alone in the study. He opened the drawer where Annie's letter rested. He didn't reread it. He simply touched the envelope, grounding himself. Later that night, Mariah joined him. You're going to lose things, she said quietly. You know that. Yes, Jonathan replied. And you're still doing this. Yes, she studied him. You're different, she said. Jonathan nodded. I spent most of my life trying to be untouchable, he said. Now I'm just trying to be present. The next morning, the board meeting was tense. Screens filled with faces, some familiar, some carefully neutral. Minho did not attend. He didn't need to. His influence spoke for him. Concerns were raised, questions asked. Words like stability and optics floated around the room like shields. Jonathan listened. When it was his turn, he spoke plainly. I won't step down, he said. And I won't retreat from accountability to preserve comfort. One board member frowned. You're prioritizing personal matters over corporate interests, she said. Jonathan responded evenly. I'm prioritizing integrity, he said. If this organization can't withstand truth, then it deserves scrutiny. Silence followed. Finally, the chairwoman spoke. We'll deliberate, she said. The meeting ended without resolution. Jonathan closed his laptop. For the first time, he didn't feel the urge to control the outcome. That afternoon, Annie came home upset. A classmate had asked why her last name was suddenly in the news. Did I do something wrong? Annie asked quietly. Jonathan knelt in front of her. No, he said firmly. You didn't. But people are talking, she said. Yes, he replied. They are. She looked at him, searching his face. Are we in trouble? Jonathan took a breath. We're in a moment, he said. Moments pass. What matters is how we act inside them. Annie considered this. I don't like being a secret, she said.
Daddy.
Jonathan felt something tighten in his chest. You're not, he said. Not anymore. And you never should have been. That night, Jonathan received another call. His father again. This time, the tone was different. Less cold, more calculated. You're forcing a confrontation, Minho said. Jonathan didn't deny it. You're destabilizing what I built, Minho continued. Jonathan replied quietly. You built it on silence, he said. Silence doesn't last forever. A pause. You think the world will protect you? Minho asked. No, Jonathan replied. I think my daughter deserves truth, even if the world doesn't like it. Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, Minho said, She asked about you. Jonathan froze. When? He asked. Yesterday, Minho said. She wanted to know why her grandfather never came to see her. Jonathan closed his eyes. What did you say? He asked. I said. Minho replied slowly. That I didn't know how to face a child who survived my decisions. The line went quiet. For the first time, Jonathan heard something unfamiliar in his father's voice. Not anger, not authority, regret. That night, Jonathan tucked Annie into bed himself. She was half asleep. Daddy? She murmured. Yes. Are we okay? Jonathan brushed her hair back gently. Yes, he said. We are. She smiled faintly and drifted off. Jonathan stayed there longer than necessary, watching her breathe. Tomorrow would bring more pressure, more consequences. But for now, there was this. A child who knew her name, a father who no longer ran, and a truth that, once spoken, refused to go back into the dark. The decision came on a Thursday afternoon. Jonathan was in the kitchen with Annie, trying and failing to help her build a model bridge out of wooden sticks and glue. The structure leaned dangerously to one side, stubborn and imperfect. It's supposed to hold weight, Annie said seriously. Jonathan adjusted one piece, then another. So are families, he said. Sometimes they look fine until pressure shows you what needs reinforcing. She considered this, then added another stick. At that moment, Ruth's name appeared on his phone. Jonathan answered. They voted, Ruth said. No preamble. And? Jonathan asked. They didn't remove you, she said. They can't justify it, not yet. But they stripped several discretionary powers. Committees. Oversight. Temporary. They say. Jonathan nodded, absorbing it. So I'm contained, he said. For now, Ruth replied. They're trying to wait you out. Is videos or... Jonathan looked at Annie. Her tongue caught between her teeth as she concentrated. I don't think waiting favors them, he said. After the call ended, he returned his attention to the bridge. Did you fix it? Annie asked. Not yet, Jonathan said, but it's standing longer than before. That evening, another development unfolded. A subpoena, not for Jonathan, for Minho Hale. The federal inquiry had widened, and the hospital case had opened doors no one expected to be opened so quickly. Jonathan learned the news from a late-night call with his attorney. This changes the leverage, she said. Significantly, Jonathan exhaled slowly. And the risk? He said. Yes, she agreed. Especially for you. Jonathan looked around the apartment. Mariah was reading on the couch. Annie was asleep, curled around her stuffed bear, the bracelet visible on her wrist. Then we move carefully, Jonathan said. The following day, Minho requested a meeting. Not at the old house, not in an office, at a quiet park near the river, neutral ground. Jonathan arrived early. Minho arrived alone. They sat on opposite ends of a bench, the city moving around them as if nothing extraordinary was happening. You didn't warn me, Minho said. I didn't know, Jonathan replied. And if I had, I wouldn't have interfered. Minho watched the water. You've always been precise, he said. Even when you disappoint me. Jonathan turned to him. I didn't come to disappoint you, he said. I came to stop pretending. Minho's voice was lower than usual. They're offering me a path, he said. Limited cooperation, reduced exposure. Jonathan remained quiet. In exchange, Minho continued, they want distance from you, from the child. Jonathan's jaw tightened. No, he said. Minho finally looked at him. You didn't let me finish, he said. I told them no. Jonathan blinked. You what? I said. Minho replied carefully, that I had already made one unforgivable decision involving that child. I would not make another. The words hung between them. You didn't protect her, Jonathan said. You erased her. Minho nodded once. Yes, he said. And I will answer for that. Jonathan studied his father's face. For the first time, it did not look untouchable. It looked old. What happens now? Jonathan asked. Minho stood. What should have happened years ago? He said. I tell the truth. That night, Annie woke from a nightmare. Jonathan found her sitting up in bed, eyes wide. I dreamed I disappeared, she whispered. Like nobody remembered me. Jonathan sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her close. You're here, he said. I see you. I remember you. I always will. She clung to his shirt. Promise? Jonathan did not hesitate. I promise, he said. That's not conditional. The next morning, the world reacted. Headlines shifted. Not quietly, not gently. Powerful patriarch cooperates with federal inquiry. Questions multiplied. Speculation exploded. Jonathan did not comment. Instead, he took Annie to school. At the gate, she stopped. Daddy, she said. Yes. If people say mean things, she asked, does that mean they don't like me? Jonathan crouched to her level. Sometimes people say mean things because they don't like the truth, he said. That's not your responsibility. She nodded. I like the truth, she said. Even when it's scary. Jonathan smiled. I know, he said. That afternoon, Jonathan received a call from the hospital board. A formal apology, a statement acknowledging failures, a settlement proposal. Not justice, but movement. That evening, Jonathan sat alone on the balcony, city lights flickering below. Mariah joined him. You okay? She asked. I think so, Jonathan replied. I'm just realizing something. What? That this isn't about winning, he said. It never was. Mariah waited. It's about refusing to let the quiet parts decide who gets erased, he said. Inside, Annie laughed in her sleep. A small sound, a powerful one. For years, Jonathan had believed legacy was something built. Now he understood. Legacy was something you corrected, even when it cost you, even when it came late. Especially then. The courthouse steps were crowded, but Jonathan didn't notice the noise at first. He noticed the doors, tall, heavy, older than anyone standing before them. Built to endure time, not fairness. Jonathan paused at the base, adjusting his jacket, feeling the familiar weight of expectations settle on his shoulders. Inside those doors, his father would speak, not as a titan of industry, not as an untouchable patriarch, but as a man answering questions he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Mariah stood beside Jonathan, her hand resting lightly on his arm. You don't have to stay, she said. I know, Jonathan replied. But I want to. They entered together. The courtroom was packed. Media in the back rows, attorneys lining the walls, a hum of anticipation that felt less like justice and more like spectacle. Minho Hale was already seated. He looked smaller, not frail but stripped of ceremony. No entourage, no assistants whispering in his ear, just an older man in a dark suit, hands folded, eyes forward. For a moment, Jonathan saw not the architect of his upbringing, but the cost of it. The prosecutor began calmly. Name, position, confirmation of authority. Then the questions sharpened. Records, decisions, conversations that were never meant to be documented. Minho answered slowly, carefully. He did not dramatize. He did not deflect. And then came the question everyone was waiting for. Did you authorize the alteration of hospital records related to the birth of a female child 6 years ago? The room seemed to inhale. Minho closed his eyes briefly. Yes, he said. The word landed heavily. Gasps, murmurs. A pen dropped somewhere. Jonathan felt Mariah's grip tighten. Why? The prosecutor asked. Minho opened his eyes. Because I believed, he said, that protecting my family's image justified destroying someone else's reality. Silence followed. And do you still believe that? The prosecutor asked. Minho looked toward Jonathan. Not directly, but close enough. No, he said. I believe it was cowardice disguised as control. Jonathan exhaled slowly. The testimony continued. Names were mentioned. Processes revealed. The machinery of quiet harm laid bare. When it ended, Minho stepped down without ceremony. He did not look back. Outside, cameras surged forward. Jonathan shielded Mariah instinctively, guiding her through the press. Questions flew. Do you feel vindicated? Is this justice? Jonathan stopped. He turned. Justice, he thought, was never a single moment. This isn't about vindication, he said evenly. It's about acknowledgement and accountability. And your daughter? Someone shouted. Jonathan's voice softened. She's at school, he said. Where she belongs. That afternoon, Jonathan picked Annie up himself. She ran to him, backpack bouncing. You're late, she said. I know, Jonathan replied. I had something important to do. She studied his face. Did it go okay? Jonathan knelt. It went honestly, he said. That's sometimes harder. She nodded, satisfied. At home, Annie drew quietly while Jonathan and Mariah watched the news on mute. Minho's image filled the screen. Commentators speculated. Analysts debated consequences. But Jonathan watched only the stillness in his father's eyes. That evening, a letter arrived. Handwritten. Short. Jonathan, I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I accept the cost of telling the truth. I hope one day she understands that silence was my greatest failure. Minho. Jonathan folded the letter carefully. He did not know what understanding would look like years from now. But he knew what truth looked like today. That night, Annie asked to sleep with the light on. Jonathan sat beside her. Are you scared? He asked. A little, she admitted. But not like before. Why not? Because even when people do bad things, she said, someone can say stop. Jonathan smiled faintly. Yes, he said. They can. Later, Jonathan stood alone on the balcony. The city lights stretched endlessly. He thought of the boy he had been raised to believe strength meant distance, and the man he was becoming learning that strength meant presence. Mariah joined him. Tomorrow will be loud, she said. Yes, Jonathan replied. And after that, Jonathan looked inside, where Annie slept peacefully. After that, he said, we live. Not perfectly, not quietly, but truthfully. Somewhere deep inside, the question that had haunted him for years finally loosened its grip. He had not failed to become a father. He had been delayed. And now, there was time. The noise faded faster than Jonathan expected. Not all at once, but gradually like a tide pulling back, leaving ordinary life exposed again. News cycles moved on. Analysts found new controversies. The city resumed its familiar rhythm, indifferent to the reckoning that had just passed through it. For Jonathan Hale, the quiet that followed felt different from the silence he had once trusted. This quiet had weight. The legal consequences came first. Settlements, formal apologies, institutional reforms announced in careful language that tried to sound moral without admitting fear. Mercy Hills rewrote its procedures. A state oversight committee was formed. Names were removed from plaques. None of it felt like victory. It felt like repair. Minho Hale entered a phase of his life he had never prepared for. Accountability without control. He did not ask to see Annie. He did not request forgiveness. He cooperated fully, withdrew publicly, and disappeared from the world he had once commanded. Jonathan did not pursue reconciliation. Some distances, he understood now, were necessary. What mattered was not closure. It was protection. On a quiet Sunday morning, Jonathan took Annie to the park alone. No security. No press. Just a patch of grass, a swing set, and the low chatter of families doing what families had always done. Annie climbed onto the swings and looked back at him. Push me, she said. Jonathan did, higher than last time. She laughed, her voice light and unburdened. Again, she said. Jonathan pushed once more. As Annie soared forward, Jonathan felt something loosen inside him, something he had carried unknowingly for years. The fear that if he stopped controlling, everything would fall apart. It didn't. That afternoon, Mariah joined them on a bench. She watched Annie run, her posture relaxed in a way Jonathan hadn't seen before. You're different with her now, Mariah said quietly. Jonathan nodded. I'm not afraid of getting it wrong, he said. I'm afraid of not being there. Mariah smiled faintly. That's the right fear, she said. They sat together in comfortable silence. No labels. No expectations beyond respect and honesty. That evening, Annie asked a question Jonathan knew was coming someday, but not this soon. Daddy, she said, brushing her teeth carefully. Why didn't you come before? Jonathan sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't look away. Because I believed a lie, he said simply. And because I didn't know how to fight it yet. Annie considered this. But you fight now, she said. Yes, Jonathan replied, but not like before. How? I listen, he said. I stay. I don't decide for other people who they get to be. She nodded, satisfied. Okay, she said. That makes sense. Jonathan tucked her in. As he turned off the light, Annie reached for his hand. Daddy? Yes? Thank you for finding me. Jonathan swallowed. I didn't, he said softly. You found me. Weeks later, Jonathan declined a speaking invitation that would have guaranteed praise. He turned down interviews that framed him as brave or redeemed. He did not want a narrative. He wanted a life. He accepted, instead, a role on an independent ethics council, overseeing corporate accountability, quiet work, slow progress, real consequences. At home, routines formed. Saturday pancakes, homework at the kitchen table, arguments about bedtime that ended in compromise. Annie grew more confident, less watchful. Her laughter came faster. Her drawings changed fewer barriers, more open space. One afternoon, she came home with a school assignment. We're writing about heroes, she announced. Jonathan tensed slightly. Who did you choose? He asked. Annie shrugged. My mom, she said, because she didn't disappear. And you. Jonathan blinked. Why me? He asked carefully. Because you stopped running, Annie replied. That's harder than being strong. Jonathan looked at Mariah, who watched quietly from the doorway. That night, after Annie was asleep, Jonathan opened the drawer one last time. He removed the letter he had written for Annie months earlier. He reread it, then he placed it back. Some truths didn't need to be handed down. They could be lived. On a cool evening, Jonathan stood on the balcony, city lights stretching endlessly before him. Mariah joined him, handing him a cup of tea. Do you regret it? She asked. Any of it? Jonathan replied. Yes, she said. Jonathan thought carefully. I regret the years I believed distance was safety, he said. But I don't regret what it took to unlearn that. Mariah nodded. Inside, Annie laughed in her sleep. A small sound. A final answer. Jonathan Hale had once believed fatherhood was a role you either chose or avoided. He had been wrong. Fatherhood, he now understood, was what happened when truth met responsibility and refused to look away. Not loudly, not perfectly, but faithfully, and that, at last, was enough. The story reminds us that real power is not found in wealth, status, or the ability to control others, but in the courage to face the truth and take responsibility for it. Silence may protect comfort, but it also allows injustice to survive. When people choose convenience over conscience, the most vulnerable are the ones erased. The lesson is clear. Dignity begins when we acknowledge one another fully, especially those who were pushed aside. True justice is not loud or dramatic. It is patient, moral, and often costly. And sometimes, the greatest act of redemption is simply staying, listening, and refusing to let fear decide who deserves to exist. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.